Never mind. Oh. In The Singer Solution to World Poverty, an article that appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Peter Singer, a professor of bioethics, calls attention to the urgent need for food and medicine in many parts of the world. Singer argues that prosperous people should donate to overseas aid organizations such as UNICEF or Oxfam America, all money not needed for the basic requirement of life. The formula is simple. Whatever money you're spending on luxuries, not necessities, should be given away. Write an essay in which you evaluate the pros and cons of Singer's argument. Use appropriate evidence as you examine each side and indicate which position you find more persuasive. All right, so we're going to kind of work ourselves through this, right? So remember, one of the things that we do with NIMSY assignments is that all of these things are that we're going to kind of walk through, we would do in the actual prompt itself to deconstruct. Problem is this. When you have rhetorical analysis, we have those 10 minutes to read, annotate, plan, right? And you feel so rushed. In argument, you feel like, I don't need the full 10 minutes. I can start writing immediately, right? Here's the thing. We need to spend more time deconstructing the prompt and creating context for ourselves and language for ourselves before we start planning and writing. Where we struggle is we struggle to say anything new. So when we're creating the context you'll see us doing today, I think that's where your 10 minutes is spent. The majority of the time you do an argument prompt is creating the context and your language for your argument. Okay, and I'll show you where that is. So first of all, let's go in and identify the debate. Debate means like that there's two sides, right? So very first thing is we have to look at what is the issue at hand. What is it that created what we call Peter Singer's exigence? And remember, exigence is like, what is it that causes somebody to speak up or act out against something? What is that straw that broke the camel's back? Yeah, the urgent need for food and medicine. And we're looking at more than just America. We're looking at in the world, right? There's the issue. So what is the debate? So the debate is a question, right? So should what? Paraphrase it for me. What's the debate?
Should your money that isn't for necessities go towards food that we need?
Everybody's? The wealthy, right? So should somebody last period said non-essential, and I liked it. Non-essential income to okay. So there is your debate. One of the things that I like is I like the fact that when you take the idea of what the debate is, and you could do this in rhetorical analysis, or you can do this in argument or synthesis, you take the task at hand and flip it into a question, right? So you take the statement of the task and flip it into a question. The answer of that question is your thesis. Make sense? Nod, somebody. Okay. All right, so if we were to get this, I now say, okay, what questions do I need to ask? So we need to ask questions, and this is where we're creating context for ourselves, because ultimately the answers to these questions can be our analysis, will help us to find analysis, right? So what questions do we have? Peter Singer's sitting right in front of us. What questions do we have?
How would we give the money?
Where's the money going to?
How would people determine non-essential income?
Okay. Well, we know that. This urgent need for food and medicine, right, that he discovered. Not discovered, but kind of felt, right?
Is he suggesting it as a requirement or more of an idea?
Is or would this be, right? Like it goes along this idea of like what defines non-essential income. I would say like what defines like a luxury item, right? I would also say what defines prosperous.
Who decides what is a luxury item?
All right, so ultimately, all these questions are creating context for yourself. Looks like we have a whole lot of questions, not a lot of answers, right? So if I were to have you write this right now, I say, okay, 40 minutes, go write this essay. Where do you think you would struggle? Answering the questions. What else? Okay. Evidence.
Yes.
This would be hard. Unless you have a strong understanding of economics, disaster relief, foreign aid organizations, unless you have a strong understanding of that, or of how this idea of equally dispersing income, right? Socialism, right? Communism, how that has affected countries and organizations in history, we're screwed, right? I mean, like, what are we going to talk about? And so that's one of the problems that we see is that forever I'm like, you need seeds of evidence, seeds of evidence, seeds of evidence. And here we are going, I got nothing, okay? So a couple of things. One, we haven't really seen arguments that are based in this kind of hypothetical idea. Except for about 4 or 5 years ago, we had 2 back-to-back years where the argument prompt was based more in like an anecdotal stories or anecdotes from students than it was based in like facts, right? Do you know what I mean? Like good seeds of evidence. We haven't really seen it since then. And what we're hoping is in those span of 2 years that happened, it was the testing committee, their first 2 years were those. The third year, we were thinking that third year, okay, great, it's going to be another one of these hypotheticals, so we're all planning our kids like to do that. And then it was a totally different type of prompt. It was more based on like this, a quote from a person. So what we think happened is these 2 years failed so bad that they went into the vault and pulled out another one to replace whatever the testing committee had put in there, because testing committees go in 3 years, right? So you see trends. So we haven't seen the trend go back to that. And if we're looking at the trend over the last couple of years, our testing committee this year has been in for a couple of years. So we kind of have an idea of the direction they're going to go, right? But we have to kind of plan for these things. So next thing we look at is why is this topic of importance or interest today? This I think is good. Can also help you with your introduction and your conclusion. It also helps you to not oversimplify an argument, right? A lot of times we see lower to mid-level argument essays that oversimplify. Yes, absolutely, everybody should give their money away. We will fix all the world's problems. When we're reading that, we know that that's a kid that doesn't really understand the complexity of how the world works, right? So we have to look at like, why is this of importance today, or why are people interested in this today? And we can look past 2005, let's look now in 2018. Why is this a topic that we should be concerned about or are concerned about today?
Because there's so many people that are less fortunate than us.
Okay. What else?
is generally regarded as a kind thing.
They're talking about the rich feeling the gap between rich and poor is growing larger.
Like social media, like exposes like more things that are happening.
All right. Oh, do you have another one?
I'm just saying, like, as Americans, we kind of tend to live in this material kind of world where we have everything that we don't really need, so it's important to realize that we should be giving.
All right. So these are all things that, again, I ask, why is it important? These are all things that I write down. At some point in my essay, I can come back to these, either as explanations of pieces of evidence, or I can come back to these as assertions, or I can come back to these as parts of my introduction or conclusion. So what I'm doing so far is I'm creating language for my argument. You're going to get to a point where in your argument you're going to go, oh God, I don't know what to say. This is where you go back to, this is all the context that you've created for yourself. So those 10 minutes that I'm telling you, you need to sit and plan, you need to sit and plan. One thing of why is this important today, if you write one thing down, you're going to say that same thing over and over and over again, right? Which doesn't create any kind of depth to your argument. All right, on the back. With a partner, I need you to define these terms, your own definitions, not dictionary definitions. Okay? And then I need you to write down synonyms for these words, your own, not from the thesaurus or from the dictionary. You have about 2 or 3 minutes. Go.
We don't need, they're like, yeah, they're not needed, they're just like materialistic they need.
Is it needed to survive?
Not to survive.
Where do you draw the line between what's a luxury and what's a necessity?
Luxuries are something that are extra. Like versus a Walmart shoe versus a Chanel shoe or something. As an example, like you don't need $1,000 pair of shoes. A basic necessity is just $2 pair of shoes that last. Like it's nothing that you need. Like you don't need to go through.
So what are necessities, items that are needed?
Yeah, to survive. Like to survive.
Like that's where I would draw the line, just what you need to survive.
Right, like in nature, like all like food, food, water, and shelter. And like a basic understanding how to like fight for yourself, but also like give what you have to someone else.
Give what is a luxury to you, just to what is a necessity to someone else. Well, I'm not.
One word without like an explanation. That word reminds me of
Charity was also
because like it always talks about injuries and like you're trying to put in goods and like those were luxuries were considered like good.
All right, ready?
You know?
Did you say no?
No, I said we were like no, like NHO.
All right, so luxuries. How would we define luxuries?
Things that are not needed for survival.
Extra.
So I would put extras under synonyms.
A desire.
I think it's important for luxuries that there could be an item that's needed for survival, but if you have too much of it, then that would still be considered a luxury
Okay.
in terms of extras.
Okay. Any other synonyms?
excessive.
All right. Necessity. Definition.
Items that are needed to survive.
I said something needed in order to live a decent life.
Say that again.
I said something needed in order to live a decent life.
Okay. Synonyms.
Priority.
Basics.
Did you say requirement?
Essentials.
Okay. Donate, give away.
I said, well, we said give something that is a luxury to you, but that is a necessity to someone else.
Anyone else?
Offer without expecting anything in return.
Okay. Synonyms.
Provide.
Do it.
Share.
All right. So let me talk to you about the need for definition and the how we use synonyms. So with definitions in argument and in synthesis, remember how we talked about in rhetorical analysis, as the reader, I can't infer what you're saying. Same thing goes especially for argument. When you have key terms, we as the reader cannot infer what you mean to be as a luxury. So I always say that in your introduction somewhere, or within the context of writing your argument, you need to define key terms. So that when I am reading your essay, if you define a luxury as this, and this is the reason why you do not support Singer's argument, then as you are logically reasoning the rest of your argument, I can go back to your definition of luxury and understand your progression. If I do not understand what your definition of a luxury is, I'm having to infer that, and I'm having to jump through more hoops to make those correct connections. If you tell me what your key terms are, your definitions of those key terms, I'm not having to make as many connections. Does that make sense to you? So that's why I say that those key terms are vital to define. Even if the prompt, we have had a few prompts that have asked you to define things, but even if the prompt does not ask you to define it, I think it's vital. Next, synonyms. If you were to write this essay, same thing that y'all did when we did Horace and you did adversity and character. Adversity, 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 adversity. You sound like you're being very repetitive when you say the key words, right, over and over again. So what happens is you end up trying to change those words and use synonyms for those words. You have to remember, we are a class of language. So when you change a word and use a synonym for a word, a synonym does not mean it has the exact same meaning. It is a version of that word. So as you change your synonym for that word, you are moving further and further away from the original intent of that essay or that prompt. So what do? Two solutions to that. One, change the order of your sentences. Don't start every sentence with adversity. Don't start every sentence with luxury. Change the order of your sentences. Instead of saying luxurious items such as a BMW, you can start off with a BMW, comma, seen as a luxury, comma, can be, right? So you can change the order of your sentences. Two, where do we use these synonyms? We use them in the explanation of our piece of evidence. So why is a BMW considered a luxury item? Because it is excessive, right? Why is water considered a necessity? Because it is a priority for our body to survive. So what you are doing is you are using these synonyms as ways to move into analysis. Does that make sense? That's why when you jot them down, you don't want to just jot down one. You want to jot down multiple because you're giving yourself language to write your argument. Make sense? Okay. Next, identify the task in the sentence. Go to the prompt. Put your finger on the task. It is not write an essay. What is it? And indicate which position you think is more possessive or more persuasive. There are two tasks. If you were, when you hear pro-con and you think organization of a paper and we think two-body paragraphs, how are you going to organize this paper? A pro and a con. Okay? A lot of kids did that and said, ta-da, there's good and bad. No matter how well it's written, that would be a 4 because your position is not in there. So what you have to remember is no matter what, question 3, which is argument, question 1, which is synthesis, is always an argument question, meaning you have to always have a position, period. Even if it doesn't say give your position on. Question 3 is an argument. You must state your position. Question.
What if you critique it? So it's like you say no, you don't agree, but then you could say a different method.
So you're going to qualify it.
Oh.
Or you're going to say no, you don't agree, and then this would be better. That could be in your conclusion. Yes.
So in this case, would our thesis? So of course, our thesis says where we stand on it, our position, and then would we have to have a paragraph that talks about that, or we just keep it on?
So let's talk about organization real quick. Okay, so let's look at our tasks. So task number 1 is evaluate pros and cons. Now, we haven't seen the language of evaluate pros and cons in many years. We did see it a few years ago in evaluate the factors, but it was a synthesis essay. So still you're looking at both sides, and I've always said don't do both sides, right? So here is an example where this prompt calls for it. Okay? Task number 2 is which is more persuasive. So somebody asked the same question that you asked about, like, well, where would you qualify? This allows you to qualify, but it has to be in a certain spot. So I'll show you. So let's look at the thesis first. So look, Singer's argument that sounds very familiar, right? Emerson argues that. Thoreau argues that. Blank. Agree, disagree, valid, invalid. The rest of this we're going to mark out. So I think from the thesis you can say what side you're on. Then you can evaluate the pros and cons, and then you can come back to, in your conclusion, why your position is stronger, why it's valid or why it's not valid after you've evaluated both sides, okay? On the bottom of that page, jot down, here's like a couple ways to organize it, I would say. Now again, remember, I have to give you all these multiple ways to organize because it's not going to all be the same. You're just doing it at the bottom of that page down here. So here's your option. You can do pros, 2 pros, right? You can assert 2 things that are good about it. Give me evidence to support it. And then your second chunk, because you have to look at the cons, you can concede the con, but then you have to refute it with evidence. So you can evaluate, you're evaluating it by conceding, going, yes, this side is good. However, this is the reason why it would not be valid. And then I would do that for both body paragraphs. The same structure, whatever you do in the first body paragraph, the same structure needs to happen in your second body paragraph. That organizationally will help your grade. Or you can organize it this way. Pro paragraph, chunk, chunk. This is the easier way, I think, of this one. Con paragraph, chunk, chunk. And then in your conclusion, you pick a side and see which one is more valid. For me, that would probably be easier.
So then where would you state your position if you're starting out with a...
Still in your thesis.
Okay.
Because still, if let's say even if your thesis, if you say it's a con, that it's invalid or infeasible, right? You could still evaluate the pros. Here are the pros for it. I totally agree with that. However, here are all the cons.
Right.
Yeah. So you're still, evaluation, you still look at both sides, but you can still have your pure position. So if we were to look at pros and cons, what would be pro for this? What would be things that would be good about following the Singer solution? Okay. What else?
If you help impoverished countries, then maybe they can bring themselves out of that. You know,
Self-sustaining kind of. Okay. What else?
Can create less of a divide.
Okay. Cons.
What if the opposite effect happens of what Zach said? What if you give so much to someone in another country that they just expect it, and then they take advantage of that, and then they don't get out of poverty because they're just expecting it?
It could keep countries from becoming self-sufficient because they would develop an unhealthy reliance on.
What else?
They can become like so self-reliant that like they become like more powerful than us.
Okay.
Sounds terrible.
So again, what we're looking at here are these. We're going to struggle to find concrete evidence, correct? So here's where I would say, if I was to write a pro or con, I could write a body paragraph talking about these ideas. Logically, it's not hypothetical, right? It's not hypothetical to think helping the less fortunate makes us feel better. That's not hypothetical. That's logical thinking. Agreed? So you don't have to say like if somebody helps somebody, but when you help somebody that is less fortunate than you are, you receive a sense of moral gratification. It's not hypothetical, it's logical reasoning. So I can turn each one of these into a logical reasoning idea. I'm going to have to loosen up on my chunk idea. Does that make sense? So I could have 3 or 4 ideas in that body paragraph of why they're pros. Make sense? I'm going to have to do the same thing for the cons. Because honestly, I don't have a background in economics and how the world functions and how one country is dependent on another and how impoverished countries pull themselves out of being impoverished and turn themselves from a third world country to a first world country, right? So what do I have to do? I have to go with my general knowledge. So writing this essay like this with not hypothetical but logical reasoning, I could score a 5 or a 6. Honestly, that's all we're looking for. Especially in a prompt like this where you're like, holy crap, what am I going to write about? Fair enough? Yes?
What an example of like poor expect and an unhealthy reliance would be in today's society, like North Korea and China, like
Yes.
all of the economic that prospers in North Korea
Yes.
is completely reliant on China
Yeah.
and them helping.
Yeah. And if you know, like if you have any ideas about communism, if you have any ideas about socialism and how it failed or how it succeeded in some parts, you could also go into like the ideas like natural disasters that we've seen, right? And people helping others in need. Somebody in the last class even said, well, what about people that like in California maybe gave a ton of money to Puerto Rico and now their extra money that went to Puerto Rico now is affecting them because now their houses have burned down and now they don't have that extra money that they have given to Puerto Rico. So now who's going to give to them? So it's the cyclical idea. Does that make sense? So this is an idea of just like how you would organize something that would be hypothetical in nature. Does that make sense? There's a difference between hypothetical. Hypothetical being if the Nazis didn't hate Jews so much, we would have never had the Holocaust. That's hypothetical, right? Not logical. Does that make sense? So there's a difference between being hypothetical and being logical. Does that make sense? Hypothetical is something that you can't even imagine to be true. Logical is, okay, when somebody does this, they will feel this way. Why do we know that? Because we have so much precedence that proves that. Right? Okay. All right, I'm going to read you one example. To give or not to give, that is the universal question which Peter Singer, professor of bioethics, has addressed in his piece, The Singer Solution to World Poverty, published in the New York Times Magazine. Singer says the formula is simple. Whatever money you're spending on luxuries, not necessities, should be given away. Okay, up to this point, very pedestrian. It's the whole entire prompt, right? Okay. Singer's argument rests on a delicate balance of human morals, natural impulses and decisions, not all of which are plausible or realistic to declare in this day and age. That kid understands the complexity of this issue, right? It's a moral debate. It's a natural impulse. It's these decisions that people have to make. That's very adult to understand. Singer's solution, notice it's not the Singer solution in quotes, it's solution in quotes, which I infer to be a little bit of a sassiness, Singer's solution, right? So as I'm reading that, I hear this tone of voice. Singer's solution, though idealistic and noble, is conclusively, so notice they're making a nod that it's good, but is conclusively, that's a very strong language of argument. This kid knows what stance they have. Is conclusively not bounded closely enough to the world of realism to be a viable choice in the fight against world poverty. That kid, more so in argument and synthesis than in rhetorical analysis, I read your introduction, I already know what I'm going to score it. 90% of the time I'm correct. That essay is going to be an 8 or 9. If that kid continues that, strength of argument, strength of voice, and they continue that, I already know it's going to be an 8 or 9. Compared to, again, the whole article, right? Prosperous people, give money for basic requirements of life, according to Singer. You should be given away. This argument has many pros and cons, though not all equally persuasive. Compare that to the last introduction. Wah, wah, wah. This kid's swimming. It's okay, but they're swimming. That kid gets a 6. I already know middle of the road, right? Compared to, in this article, Singer argues that prosperous people should give all money not used in necessity to charity. This bold argument, I already know they're faking it. This bold argument, I already know this kid doesn't know what he's talking about, will either persuade or disinterest someone fully. Oh. Okay. There are many pros and cons of Singer's argument. Oh, great. I already know the kid's going to fail. Introductions. Yes? Okay. The pros of Singer's theory, although few, are powerful and immediately obvious to all who view his argument. Okay, so he's nodding to him again, right? They're good. There's not many of them, but they're good. Yes, human nature is generous. It feels good to give, and no one should be selfish. It even satisfies an innate sense of justice, fairness, and equality. Those who have more should give to those who have less. This method would tame the human sin of selfishness, and thus even satisfies religious ideology, help thy neighbor. No matter which way you look at it, Singer's argument is an undeniably noble undertaking which expands on human generosity and optimistically glorifies human nature. There is nothing morally wrong in what he is suggesting, and it would even please some to act as martyrs and saints, masochistic in their own self-deprivation. Overall, its benefits suggest a rosy future for the human race. When I read an essay and I go, holy crap, who is this kid? Like, I want this kid in my class. I already know that they're scoring 7, 8s, 9s. This is a kid that is not being, like, sarcastic, is not being pompous and is talking down to anybody. This is a very witty kid that knows that I agree with you. Your ideas are great. They totally work. Morally, great, yes. But the idea of being this masochistic in their own self-deprivation, to be a masochist, it's somebody that enjoys like suffering, right? So here they are, that they are enjoying their own suffering. So really, honestly, it's not for the people that you're giving it to, it's for your own enjoyment. So he's stabbing people and then like walking away and people are going, ooh, like he just cut him and nobody knew, right? However, notice that shift. While the supporters of Singer's method have righteousness, justice, and logical reasoning on their side, those who oppose Singer may draw on the resources of realism. Back to the real world, people. That's all great. Let's go back to realism. Right? So again, it's that wittiness of that language. Historical evidence and their own brand of logical reasoning to support their own argument. In a practical sense, we must look at the consequences of this action and where they would fall. The first roadblock lies in the murky division between luxury and necessity. I love, this kid knows how to use a dash. Please don't start using dashes. This kid knows how to use a dash. And the dashes are these little like side notes where he's like leaning going, it's all murky. Just wait, here it comes. Right? How necessary is toilet paper? I hate rhetorical questions. I think y'all do them poorly. Y'all do them poorly. This kid, I go, yeah, how necessary is it? Right? When I read it, I'm like, yeah, you're totally right. We need to eat and drink and breathe to keep our bodies alive, but can we still exist without toilet paper? Can we not? Yet our noses and a sense of modesty would not appreciate a human race sans toilet paper. Yet even when this sense of modesty has been abandoned, the effects still linger. Funny, linger, bathroom, toilet paper, effects. What are toilet paper workers to do? Oh my God, yeah. What about them? If no one buys toilet paper, workers in those factories will be laid off and as a result lack funds to feed themselves and their families, exacerbating the issue of human poverty. And what of the money given to these charities? In many cases, not 100% of that goes directly to feeding and clothing the impoverished of the world. When directly observed, Singer's solution is not only a naive plan to undertake what millennia of human history has not helped, but also a misinterpretation of what causes human poverty and what can help to cure it. Holy crap, that's true. During World War II, Franklin D. Roosevelt initiated government deficit spending, and the increase of production and jobs helped America out of the Great Depression. History is behind the critics of the Singer solution, and realism also backs them up. This is where this kid got an 8. This is where if this kid had gone in a little bit more into tying back the idea of FDR's result and how we would maybe make that on the big scheme into the world, would have been great. That could have taken it to a 9. right? Basically, it goes on to say it does more harm than good. Freaking A. The tone, the voice, the everything. I know. This is what I expect of y'all next time. All right. Take out the other prompt that you picked up today. Write your name in the top left-hand corner. You have 2 minutes to read and annotate that prompt. Name in the top left-hand corner. Read and annotate that prompt. Go. Where's your task? Take a position on the relationship between certainty and doubt. Keywords. And relationship. You must name the relationship. You can't just say that there is one, right? You can't say there's not one. But what types of relationships do we have? Good, bad. I mean, if we want to talk very pedestrian. What else? Strong.
Parasitic.
Oh. Parasitic means like one sucking off the other. Dependent. Right? Does this prompt require you to go back to Phelps or Russell? Does it tell you to take a position on those? No. What is their purpose there for? Yep. It is going to give you ideas of relationships. What does doubt mean? What else? What else? Remember what we're doing. We're creating context for ourselves. What about certainty? What else? What?
Inevitable. Confidence.
Okay. Put your name on it. Pass it to the front of your row. I'm taking that up from you today. Good job.